Before some stories are told, they send a chill through the air, as if the past itself is warning you to turn back. But you didn't come here to turn back. You came for the kind of stories buried in forgotten archives, whispered in old towns, and feared even by history itself. Tonight we go deeper, into a tale that Natchez hoped the world would forget. The rise of the three mysterious brothers began long before Natchez realized something was wrong, long before anyone connected their quiet footsteps to the chain of troubles that would soon follow. At first, their presence felt almost ordinary, nothing more than three travelers passing through a region where strangers often came and went with the riverboats. Yet something about them tugged at attention, an unspoken weight in the way they carried themselves, a silence in their eyes that made even seasoned traders cautious when speaking to them. They arrived without luggage, without stories, and without the usual urgency of men searching for work or food. Instead, they moved through town as though they were studying it, absorbing every road, every family, every vulnerable corner. People noticed, but no one dared to question them openly, convinced that perhaps they were simply eccentric wanderers trying to find their place along the Mississippi frontier. Over time, however, unease began to spread across Natchez as the brothers settled into a rhythm that felt strangely intentional. They visited markets without buying anything, lingered near homesteads without needing assistance, and stood at riverbanks watching the current as if waiting for something or someone. Their manner of speech, quiet and measured, carried no warmth, and the rare times they engaged with locals, their words felt carefully chosen, as though each sentence was meant to reveal nothing. What disturbed people more was their unity. They moved in near-perfect synchrony, always aware of where the others stood, always communicating with the slightest glance. It was this unspoken bond that made Natchez residents feel as if the brothers shared a purpose deeper than simple travel, a purpose that no one could yet understand but everyone instinctively feared. Their presence became a topic in whispered conversations at trading posts, taverns, and church gatherings, with each retelling adding a little more tension, a little more suspicion. As the weeks passed, small incidents began to occur. Strange, subtle disruptions that never pointed directly to the brothers, yet always seemed to happen near places they had recently visited. Lanterns were found extinguished in the middle of the night, even in homes where families swore they had left them burning. Tools went missing from sheds and were later discovered stacked neatly in impossible places, as though moved with intention rather than stolen. Footprints appeared along muddy paths that led only to closed windows or locked doors. Animals grew restless without explanation, barking into the dark at unseen movements. None of these events were serious enough to incite panic, but they built a quiet foundation of dread throughout the town. People began to watch the brothers more closely, noticing the subtle curiosity in their expressions whenever someone appeared unsettled or anxious. It was almost as if the brothers found entertainment in observing the fear they left behind. What deepened the suspicion further was the way the brothers interacted with each other whenever these incidents were mentioned. They never denied being nearby, yet they never confirmed anything either. Instead, they would exchange fleeting looks, their mouths curving into faint, unreadable smiles. This behavior created the impression that they knew more than they let on, that they operated with knowledge or intentions hidden beneath the dull surface of their calm demeanor. The townsfolk could not shake the feeling that the brothers were not simply passing through but preparing for something, perhaps choosing when and where to make their next move. Their growing comfort in the community, paired with an increasing boldness in how closely they approached certain households, intensified the sense that their rise in Natchez was more of a strategic embedding than the casual presence of travelers. By the time Natchez realized the full weight of what was unfolding, the brothers' influence had already rooted itself deeply into the social fabric of the area. People spoke about them in hushed tones, fearful of drawing unwanted attention, afraid that the very act of acknowledging their presence might provoke them. The brothers no longer blended into the background. Instead, they became part of the atmosphere itself, a quiet, persistent pressure that transformed the most ordinary routines into moments thick with suspicion. Whether standing near the old cotton roads or appearing unannounced at the edges of family gatherings, their mere existence cast a shadow over Natchez's life. And though no major tragedy had yet struck, the rise of the three brothers was unmistakable, marked not by loud chaos, but by the slow, creeping unraveling of safety that everyone felt, yet no one could fully explain. The sequence of unexplained disappearances and ruined households began so subtly that most people in Natchez did not recognize the pattern until it was already too late. At first, the incidents looked like isolated misfortunes that any frontier community might experience, families losing livestock, valuables going missing, or a member failing to return from an evening errand. Each event seemed unfortunate but ordinary, the kind of hardship expected in a place surrounded by dense woods, unpredictable weather, and long stretches of unpatrolled land. But beneath these everyday worries lay something much more deliberate, a creeping disruption that mirrored the quiet presence of the three brothers. Whenever a family suffered an unusual setback, the brothers had been seen nearby days or even hours before. Their subtle movement across the region became a shadowy timeline that matched the growing list of disruptions, though no one was ready to say it aloud. As weeks turned into months, the disappearances took on a stranger rhythm. People did not vanish publicly or dramatically. Rather, they slipped away from daily routines without leaving clear signs of what happened. A father who went out to check a fence line simply never returned. A young woman walking to a neighbor's home was last seen glancing nervously over her shoulder as if she sensed being watched. A pair of brothers tending their fields abandoned their tools mid-task, the handles still warm as though dropped in a moment of panic. These scenes became unsettling echoes across the territory, quiet, incomplete stories that ended abruptly. The few who claimed to hear or see something always described the same eerie detail. An unusual stillness in the air, as if the environment itself stopped moving right before the disappearance. And though no one could prove a connection, the three mysterious brothers were always recalled in rumors that followed each incident, particularly their strange habit of appearing near troubled households moments before misfortune struck. The ruined households were not only marked by missing people, but by a suffocating heaviness that seemed to swallow the life out of the homes themselves. Doors were left hanging open even when residents insisted they locked them. Personal belongings were displaced in ways that made no logical sense. Family heirlooms found in fields, kitchen tools discovered miles away along riverbanks, and letters torn or scattered as though someone had searched for something invisible. Houses that once rang with children's voices fell silent, and properties that had thrived for years suddenly felt abandoned, even when a few family members remained. What disturbed the community even more was the subtle uniformity in how these homes deteriorated. Each one experienced strange disturbances shortly before a major disappearance, and each one had been visited, observed, or quietly circled by the brothers. But the brothers left no physical trace, no footprints leading into locked rooms, no signs of forced entry, only the unsettling knowledge that they were nearby. Whispers began to circulate at night gatherings, where the remaining families compared experiences in a desperate attempt to understand what was happening. Men who prided themselves on bravery admitted they felt watched whenever they passed certain paths, especially ones the brothers favored. Women spoke of hearing distant tapping against windows, yet finding nothing outside. Children who could not fully explain their fear hid under quilts, describing shadows that did not belong to anyone in their home. And still, the disappearances continued, each new case weaving into a growing web of dread that hovered over Natchez like a storm cloud that refused to break. Every discussion ended in the same direction. The brothers were always nearby before the ruin began, their quiet presence becoming the unspoken link tying the misfortunes together. By the time people recognized the true scale of the problem, the community was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. They could not accuse the brothers openly because nothing concrete connected them to the disappearances, yet they could not ignore the suffocating intuition that these three men were the common denominator. Families barricaded their homes, but that brought little comfort, as many of the ruined households had taken the same precautions. Others tried to flee Natchez entirely, only to find that their preparations were disrupted or delayed by inexplicable setbacks. The sense of helplessness spread until it colored every conversation, every quiet night, every unexpected knock on a door. And through it all, the brothers continued to move through Natchez calmly and silently, leaving behind a trail of uncertainty and ruin that no one could fully explain, but everyone felt tightening around them like a cold, unseen grip. The unusual patterns in how the 7 families were targeted settled over Natchez like a puzzle no one wanted to solve, but everyone felt trapped inside. Though each incident appeared isolated on the surface, A deeper look revealed an unnerving similarity in the sequence of events leading up to each family's downfall. It always began with something small and seemingly harmless: a missing tool, an unexplained noise, an unfamiliar figure glimpsed on the edges of a property at dusk. These subtle disturbances were easy to dismiss individually, but when compared across all 7 families, they formed a chilling blueprint. Every household experienced the same quiet warnings days before their ruin, as if someone were testing the boundaries, studying the layout of each home and measuring the reactions of the people living within. And in each case, the brothers had been seen lingering near fences, walking past fields, or standing on distant hilltops just long enough for someone to take notice. What made the pattern even more disturbing was the timing. The brothers never approached a home during busy hours or in the presence of groups. They always appeared either early in the morning when fog hugged the ground, or late in the evenings when lanterns were just beginning to glow. These hours blurred the line between light and shadow, giving the brothers the perfect opportunity to observe without being fully seen. Families often reported feeling watched long before any visible threat emerged, describing the sensation of eyes following them from behind trees or the edges of cornfields. It was as though the brothers preferred to unsettle their targets first, allowing fear to settle in slowly before anything tangible occurred. This gradual erosion of peace became part of the pattern, creating a tension that weakened each household's sense of safety long before misfortune officially struck. Another unsettling element was how the family's daily routines were subtly disrupted before their ruin. Livestock refused to approach feeding troughs, as if detecting an unfamiliar scent in the area. Wells that had held clear water for years suddenly developed a murky tint or an odd metallic taste. Children woke from nightmares they could not describe, insisting they heard whispers outside their windows, and items inside the homes shifted positions ever so slightly. Chairs angled differently, curtains drawn halfway, doors left ajar when no one admitted touching them. These disturbances were never violent, but they were deeply intrusive, signaling that someone had been inside the family's private space without leaving any evidence behind. The sheer consistency of these small intrusions across 7 separate households confirmed that the pattern was not random but planned with a precision that chilled even the bravest men in Natchez. As the pattern unfolded further, people noticed that the brothers targeted families who held specific qualities: those living on the edges of town, those responsible for maintaining small trade routes, or those who kept to themselves, far from neighbors who might offer help. These isolated households were the easiest to watch, the simplest to study, and the least likely to receive quick assistance if something went wrong. The brothers seemed to understand the landscape with uncanny accuracy, navigating wooded paths and abandoned trails with the confidence of men who had studied the area long before stepping foot in Natchez. They approached their targets with a patience that felt unnatural, circling properties repeatedly before making any noticeable move. Their ability to predict the routines of each family made it clear that they were not operating on impulse, but rather following a strategy that required planning and coordination. By the time the community realized that the ruin of each family followed the same quiet steps, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. The brothers marked their targets with silence, fear, and an intangible pressure that wrapped itself around the households like an invisible net. Every family who fell had first experienced nights of restlessness, days of strange disruptions, and moments of seeing the brothers in places that made no sense. And though people attempted to warn the remaining households, the warnings came too late because the pattern had already begun its slow, deliberate progression toward them. Each new family found themselves caught in the same sequence of eerie events, watching helplessly as the brothers moved through their lives with the same quiet certainty that had preceded the downfall of the families before them. The rumors and testimonies that suggested the brothers shared a dark pact grew slowly, whispered first in private corners and then echoed across the entire Natchez region as more families experienced the same haunting disturbances. People sensed that the brothers were bound together by something far deeper than ordinary kinship. Their movements were too synchronized, their reactions too identical, and their silence too deliberately controlled. It was as though they communicated without speaking, understanding one another with a single glance or a subtle shift in posture. Witnesses claimed that whenever someone tried to question one brother, the other two would appear within moments, stepping out from behind barns, trees, or alleyways as if summoned by an invisible signal. This uncanny unity unnerved the community, making it seem as though the three men were bound by some unspoken oath that kept them constantly aware, constantly connected, and constantly prepared for the next step in whatever unexplainable mission they followed. As the disappearances and disturbances multiplied, people began sharing stories that hinted at a deeper origin behind the brothers' strange bond. Some said the brothers had once been part of a remote settlement that vanished years before, leaving behind only ruins and a legacy of unanswered questions. Others claimed they had survived a tragedy so severe that it changed something inside them, binding them together in a way normal men could never understand. Still, others whispered that the brothers had made a pact of loyalty forged under circumstances too dark to be spoken of openly, a pact that demanded they act as one entity rather than three separate individuals. No one knew which version was true, but every rumor amplified the unsettling truth that whatever held the brothers together was not simply familial love or shared experience. It felt supernatural in a subtle, quiet way, unnerving enough to inspire fear, but vague enough to keep people guessing. These stories grew even stronger when multiple individuals reported witnessing peculiar behavior that they could not explain logically. Farmers spoke of seeing the brothers standing motionless in fields at dawn, arranged in a perfect line as if observing something distant or listening to a sound no one else could hear. Travelers swore they spotted the brothers at opposite ends of Natchez within the same hour, moving with an unusual speed that made it impossible for them to have traveled naturally. And perhaps the most unsettling testimonies came from those who claimed they overheard the brothers speaking in tones so low and unified that it sounded like a single voice emerging from three bodies. Though these accounts were difficult to verify, the consistency in their details added credibility, convincing many that the bond the brothers shared was not only strange but deeply deliberate. Their connection seemed to erase the boundaries between them, making them appear as one mind operating through three figures. These rumors fueled a rising paranoia, particularly among families who sensed they were being watched. People believed the brothers' pact involved more than simple loyalty. It involved purpose. The precision with which they targeted households suggested coordination at a level no ordinary group could achieve. They predicted movements, anticipated reactions, and adapted their behavior to exploit weaknesses within each family's routine. The idea that the brothers shared thoughts or intentions became a common theory, especially among those who narrowly avoided misfortune. Witnesses described moments in which one brother would step back just as another stepped forward, or one would appear behind a property seconds after another disappeared into nearby woods. It was as if they were always aware of each other's location, always adjusting their approach in perfect harmony to maintain whatever plan they had set in motion. This eerie synchronization convinced many that the brothers operated under a pact that guided their actions with an efficiency no one in Natchez had ever seen before. As more testimonies surfaced, the whispers hardened into belief. The community became convinced that the three brothers shared an agreement rooted in secrecy, discipline, and perhaps something far more unnatural. Their unity made them unpredictable, impossible to confront individually, and increasingly sinister as the pattern of ruin continued across the region. The idea of them having a dark pact became the only explanation people could cling to, a way to make sense of the strange consistencies in their behavior. And whether the pact was forged through trauma, ritual, or a vow taken in some forgotten corner of their past, the outcome was the same. The brothers operated with a single intention that no one else could decipher, and that intention cast a growing shadow over every family who crossed their path. The chilling legacy the brothers left behind spread through Natchez not like a story, but like a stain, one that refused to fade even after the last of their footsteps had vanished from the dirt roads. Families who survived their presence spoke in low voices, unwilling to say much but unable to forget the unnerving silence that followed the brothers wherever they went. The 7 ruined households stood as grim reminders of the fear that once strangled the community, their empty porches and abandoned fields carrying an atmosphere so heavy that even the bravest travelers avoided them. People believed that whatever force had driven the brothers had seeped into the land itself, leaving behind a lingering tension in the air, a feeling that danger might return at any moment. The legacy was not something written in documents or preserved in records. It lived in the uneasy glances, the barred windows, and the hesitations that marked daily life long after the brothers were gone. As the years passed, Stories about the brothers shifted from whispered accounts to fables filled with eerie details that blurred the line between history and haunting memory. Children grew up hearing warnings about wandering too close to the abandoned properties, not only because they were unsafe, but because people believed the brothers' presence had left behind something watchful. Travelers passing through Natchez reported feeling sudden chills when crossing the old homesteads, describing the sense of someone unseen standing just behind them. Even the surrounding woods gained a reputation. Hunters swore they heard footsteps that mirrored their own, always maintaining a measured distance. Some believed these remnants were nothing more than the echoes of fear, but others were convinced that the brothers had left a mark too deep to be dismissed as imagination. Every retelling reinforced the idea that the memory of the brothers remained active, as though refusing to rest. What strengthened their legacy further was how the land itself seemed unable to recover from the devastation. The 7 ruined households never returned to full life. Attempts to rebuild often failed under mysterious circumstances. Tools breaking unexpectedly, structures collapsing without reason, or workers complaining of overwhelming discomfort that drove them away. Landowners who tried to sell the abandoned properties found no buyers willing to take on the risk, and even those who expressed interest quickly changed their minds after visiting the sites. The soil grew overgrown, the wells dried up, and the wind that blew across the empty yards carried a strange, hollow whistle that unnerved anyone who lingered too long. It was as if the land remembered what had happened and refused to welcome new life, holding on to the remnants of fear that had once consumed the families who lived there. Over time, the story of the brothers evolved into local folklore, shaping Natchez's identity in ways no one could have predicted. Elders warned younger generations about the signs of creeping misfortune, advising them to trust their instincts when silence felt too heavy or when shadows lingered in places they shouldn't. Folklorists who visited the region collected dozens of accounts that, despite variations, all pointed to a shared belief. The brothers had not merely harmed 7 families, they had scarred the collective memory of the community. Their legacy became a lesson about vigilance, about the importance of noticing patterns, and about the dangers of ignoring small disturbances before they grow into something far darker. Even outsiders who knew nothing about the original events quickly sensed the unease embedded in the stories and the landscape, making Natchez a place where the past felt unusually alive. In the decades that followed, people continued to avoid saying the brothers' names, fearing that speaking too boldly about them might summon misfortune back into the region. The silence became part of the legacy itself, a protective measure against inviting trouble. The ruined households eventually blended into nature, but their outlines remained visible to anyone who knew where to look. Charred wood, sunken foundations, twisted fences reclaimed by vines. These remnants stood as silent witnesses to the terror that once swept through Natchez, reminding everyone that some histories do not fade quietly. The brothers' legacy endured not because of what they physically left behind, but because of the unshakable fear they planted in the community's memory, a fear that lingered in every whispered story, every cautious glance, and every step taken on the old haunted roads where their shadows once wandered.